The 40-man provisional USMNT roster that will participate in the Nations League this June has been released by CONCACAF, and we are here to talk about it on 11 Yanks. Hey guys, what's up? I'm Pete Douthit, host of the 11 Yanks Show. Most of you know me already. If you're new, smash subscribe. We have new videos on Wednesday and Sunday. As always, guys, if you're here, smash that like button. Make sure you have your notifications turned on so that you never miss a video. Okay, before we get into it, can I just say that the fact that I can make a video about a provisional 40-man roster for a regional tournament and that this video will get anywhere from 5,000 to 10,000 views shows the increased level of interest and passion in the program. Before Cuba, I don't think this would have happened. I don't think USMNT fans would care that much about the provisional roster for the Gold Cup. This increased interest and passion is probably due to two things. One, failing to qualify for the World Cup has demonstrated to fans that we have to keep a very close eye on our program, on our national team, on our federation, and to scrutinize decisions that the federation makes, and that includes anything from coaching hires to roster selections to tactics on the field. Basically, we've lost a lot of faith in the people running the game in this country, whereas before I think fans would sit back and go, all right, that's the roster, interesting. Now we analyze it a little more critically and go, should this person really be there? And that is a good thing. More interest equals more accountability, and that is exactly what we want. Two, I think the fact that we have all these exciting players in Europe and playing in Champions League and on all these amazing leagues is doing a lot for the interest and the passion around this program. And guys, I just have to say it again, we are on the precipice of great things. So glad that we're on this journey together. Let's get into it. Okay, there's two things to consider with this roster. Number one, I've seen some people say that we shouldn't really care about this 40-man roster because it's going to be whittled down to 23, and then that's the roster that we should be discussing. Here's where I disagree. This 40-man roster is the provisional roster, which means anybody who's going to Nations League has to be on this roster. While I'm pretty sure that Gregg Berhalter has a fairly good idea of who is going to be on his 23-man roster already, these 40 guys are the only guys he can call up if there are injuries or other circumstances leading to a withdrawal before the actual tournament starts. So for example, if Weston McKennie gets injured or isn't quite fully fit and they decide they're not going to bring him to Nations League, that means there's a chance that a guy like Christian Roldan makes the Nations League roster ahead of guys like Paxton Pomykal or Caden Clark or Eric Williamson or Julian Green who are not on this roster. So who is on the provisional roster matters because it tells you who even has a shot or a chance at being on the Nations League roster. Number two, this provisional roster isn't getting together for training the way they would before a Gold Cup or before a World Cup. This is literally just a roster of names that's submitted to CONCACAF, and that's the roster they can pick from. All the players are with their clubs, whether that's in MLS or in Europe, and the only guys who will actually travel and be together in camp are the 23 guys in the final roster, if that makes sense. Okay, let's get into digging into the roster, but before we do, a quick word from our sponsor. Hey guys, I'm happy to say that 11 Yanks has a new sponsor. OneFootball is an app that allows you to get all of your news, transfers, stats, and in-match updates from over 160 leagues in over 60 countries. I've been using this app for the last few weeks, and here's what I love about it. I can select the teams that I love, in this case the USMNT, and with one click, I'll have access to all the news about the teams, statistics from past games, lineups, information about future games, as well as who is part of the roster. I can also do the same thing for specific players, select the ones that I want to follow, and I'll be able to track that player's data, performance, and stats throughout the season for both club and country. So check out the app, guys, OneFootball. Click the link in the description below to download the app directly and start getting all the information you need about the players and teams that you love. All right, guys, let's dig into it. And as always, we start with goalkeepers. Okay, so goalkeepers is one of the few parts of the roster I don't really have a problem with. This seems about right to me. This is the 5-man goalkeeping pool that we will be picking from for both these tournaments, Gold Cup and Nations League, for World Cup qualifying, and probably also for Qatar. Zack, Steffen, David Ochoa, Matt Turner, Sean Johnson, and Ethan Horvath. I'm really glad that David Ochoa is in this provisional roster. I don't know if he's going to make the final 23. Now with goalkeepers, it's usually 3 keepers. Now I really don't know how this is going to play out because I imagine that some of these guys are going to be in the Gold Cup, and I don't know if Gregg takes any goalkeeper for both tournaments. My guess is that Zack Steffen will go to Nations League with Sean Johnson and Ethan Horvath as his backups, and then David Ochoa and Matt Turner will end up going to the Gold Cup, but I could be wrong about that. It's hard to know what Gregg is thinking. We really don't have a designated number 2. If you ask any USMNT fan who's the current number 2, you'd get some people who would say Matt Turner, some would say Ethan Horvath, some would say Sean Johnson, and some people would probably say David Ochoa, even though there's no evidence of that. So it's very hard to predict. The only thing I know for sure is that Zack Steffen will be on that 23 if he's fit and healthy. Keep in mind, Steffen is going to dress for the Champions League final, which is one day before the Switzerland game, so don't expect him to play in the Switzerland game, and maybe there's a chance that Matt Turner or Sean Johnson or whoever makes that 23-man roster plays in that game. I'm very curious to see who Gregg will pick, but I'm definitely delighted to see these 5 gentlemen included as the keepers. Okay, moving on to fullbacks, and there were 6 fullbacks included. Most of them make a lot of sense to me. DeAndre Yedlin, Sergino Dest, Antonee Robinson, Reggie Cannon, Bryan Reynolds, and Sam Fines. Now, if I had to pick, I'm guessing that Gregg Berhalter is going to take Sergino Dest, Antonee Robinson, Reggie Cannon, and Sam Vines. Dest and Robinson are no-brainers. They're probably going to be the 2 starters. They've been involved in all the camps and have played regularly, both of them playing at high levels in Europe. Antonee Robinson, by the way, did just get relegated from Fulham last week, so that's sad to see. Hopefully the kid gets bought by another Premier League club, because I think he showed that not only can he hold his own in the Premier League, but he can be very effective. Reggie Cannon seems to have Gregg Berhalter's trust, so I expect him to be in this Nations League roster. And I'm guessing he takes Sam Vines, maybe as a backup to Antonee Robinson. I'm not really sure. I think he's going to go with just 3 at the end of the day, so he can take 5 center backs, but maybe not. Maybe he wants to have another look at DeAndre Yedlin, and so he calls him in. Maybe he wants to have another look at Bryan Reynolds, who, by the way, had a great 30 minutes against Northern Ireland and is still playing regularly in the Serie A, guys. That's a level that I did not expect from him. Now, yeah, he hasn't exactly been balling out, but he's actually been playing relatively competently well. He played left back in the last game, which I thought was bizarre. I'm curious to see what's going to happen with Jose Mourinho coming in with Bryan Reynolds' career, but he's definitely one of our higher upside right backs, maybe higher upside than Reggie Cannon, but it might be too early to say. Anyways, these are the 6 fullbacks that he's going to be drawing from, and I'm very fascinated to see who makes the actual Nations League roster. He took 8 center backs: John Brooks, Mark McKenzie, Aaron Long, Chris Richards, Matt Miazga, Walker Zimmerman, Miles Robinson, and Tim Ream. As a provisional roster goes, I don't really have a complaint with any of these guys. It's about who I expected to be involved in a provisional roster. Personally, I don't think that either Walker Zimmerman or Mark McKenzie go. I also don't think that Miles Robinson goes. If I had to guess, if he only takes 4 center backs, I think he takes Long, Miazga, Richards, and Brooks. If he takes 5 center backs, I think he brings Tim Ream for the experience and for the left-footedness of his play on the ball. While we're talking quickly about Tim Ream, a lot of people think that he shouldn't be involved with the national team because he's not playing for Fulham and because he is also aging. Now, to a degree, I agree with that. The only reason why it makes sense to bring a guy like Tim Ream is as a backup to John Brooks, because he's the only other left-footed center back in the pool. Now, the counterpoint to that is that both Chris Richards and Matt Miazga can play on that left-hand side because they are both two-footed. So maybe you have a point that there's no longer a need for Tim Ream to be involved, but if we are going to take 5 center backs and Tim Ream is going to be that 5th center back, I don't have a real problem with it, and I don't think it's the end of the world. Although part of me thinks that Mark McKenzie would be a better option because he's a guy that you want to integrate more into the squad. Either way, there are things that I would maybe like to see, but I'm not going to be too upset if I don't see them. Overall, the only guy who really shouldn't be here is Walker Zimmerman. Everybody else has a case to make. Let's jump into midfielders, and here's where it really starts to get interesting. Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie, and Yunus Musah, the holy triumvirate of central midfielders that will probably start in that opening game against Honduras. Then some other expected names: Luca de la Torre, Brenden Aaronson, and Sebastian Lletget. Now, there's some confusion for me with Luca De La Torre and Brenden Aaronson's position, because both of them are versatile enough that they can be classified as forwards/wingers, like wide forwards, or they can also play as central midfielders. I think this makes them very versatile and very handy to have in a roster, but I don't exactly know where they're going to be classified in the final 23 roster, although I do expect both of them to be there, along with Sebastian Lletget, who had another poor outing in last week's El Tráfico game, and it did spark some discussion on Twitter because people were talking about why Lletget looks so poor for his club and why he looks so good for LA Galaxy. Guys, poor and good are a little bit hard to quantify, but I've said this before. Lletget is good at connecting passes. He isn't creative. He isn't going to provide incisive, penetrating passes. He isn't going to dribble at players in a meaningful way. He's going to connect passes in a simple, straightforward way. Now, when you're surrounded by really good players who move off the ball really well, it does make you look better and it does raise your level. But Sebastian Lletget is going to be a simple connector of passes. And the other thing he does well, which consistently earns him a spot, is that he arrives late to score goals. He is good at arriving late in the box to get on the end of a cross or a pass and finishing. And so that will probably earn him a spot in the Nations League on top of his experience. Does he deserve to be there over other players? That's a question that we could debate for hours on end. At the end of the day, I don't have a problem with him being there. Now, the other central midfielders that were brought, Kellyn Acosta, Jackson Yueill, Owen Otasowie, and Christian Roldan. Those of you who know me for a long time know that I don't think either Kellyn Acosta or Christian Roldan should be anywhere near the national team, not even a 40-man provisional roster. They just aren't good enough. Now, some people will say Kellyn Acosta has a case because we still don't have a proper backup to Tyler Adams. First of all, Kellyn Acosta, not a 6, guys. We saw him play as a 6 against Northern Ireland. It didn't work. And even against Jamaica, a lot of the time, he wasn't playing as a 6. He was playing as an 8. And we have so many much better 8s than Kellyn Acosta. He shouldn't be here. Now, Jackson Yueill, I have some reservations about Jackson Yueill as well, and whether or not he's going to be with the USMNT long term, personally, I don't think so. But in my mind, it's Jackson Yueill fighting Owen Otasowie for that backup spot to Tyler Adams. Each of them has pros and cons. Jackson Yueill is probably a better passer of the ball. Owen Otasowie is probably better physically and overall is going to be more of a defensive presence than Jackson Yueill is going to be. So I hope that Owen Otasowie gets Gregg Berhalter's trust and Gregg Berhalter trusts him enough to say he should be there as Adams' backup. Now, some people say, Otasowie isn't playing that much for Wolves, or he's playing in the wrong position for Wolves. Guys, I look at a player's ability, and everything I've seen from Owen Otasowie tells me that while he is still raw, and while he still has things he can work on, particularly his passing under pressure, Jackson Yueill would get nowhere near that Wolves roster, and so personally, I would prefer Owen Otasowie, but I would probably also understand if Gregg took Jackson Yueill. So long as there's no Kellyn Acosta or Christian Roldan in that final 23, I'm a happy man. Okay, moving on to forwards here. Josh Sargent, Timo Weah, Daryl Dike, Gio Reyna, Christian Pulisic, and Conrad De La Fuente. This fine fettle of 6 gentlemen who I really hope are the 6 that end up going. But there's also Nico Giacchini, Gyasi Zardes, Paul Arriola, Jordan Siebatcheu, and Tyler Boyd. Now, before I jump into these 5 guys, let's talk about the 6. This 6 for me offers the perfect balance because you have 2 guys who are center forwards. That's Josh Sargent and Daryl Dike. You've got another guy, Timo Weah, who can play either as a center forward or as a wide forward. And by the way, he could also play as a roaming 8-10 if you gave him the license to do it. Christian Pulisic and Gio Reyna, I don't need to say any more about those 2. Also very versatile, can play wide, can play in midfield. Conrad De La Fuente has actually had a much better second half of the season than he did in the first. And it's frustrating because he's still playing in the Spanish 3rd division. Now, Conrad always had a lot of ability on the ball, but we didn't always see a lot of end product from him. And so that's why I think a lot of us had reservations. This season, he's added end product to his ability. And so that's been really good to see. I think he's racked up something like 6 or 7 goals and assists in the last 3 or 4 games. He's also a lot faster and a lot more technical when time and space are compressed than a guy like Paul Arriola or Tyler Boyd, but we'll get into them in just a second. Nico Giacchini is another guy that, like Timo Weah, can play either wide or as a center forward. I've seen him play wide for FC Con. I don't think it's his best position, guys. I think this guy is a target man, just like Josh Sargent. We saw that when he scored 2 goals against Panama in last November's friendly, but it wasn't just his goal scoring, it was his hold-up play and awareness of players around him that I really liked, and I think he could also be involved. I don't know who I would put him above. Is there an off chance he goes instead of Conrad De La Fuente because he can also play wide, and because Brendan Aaronson and Luca De La Torre can also play wide? Maybe. I'm just not sure you need to bring 3 or 4 center forwards to a tournament like this, so I think João McKennie hopefully misses out. Gyasi Zardes, the subject of much debate. A lot of people think that Gregg still rates him, and this Nations League tournament will be very telling. If he's on that final 23, the message will be clear. Gregg still thinks that Gyasi has something to offer. Personally, I don't. I've seen enough of Gyasi Zardes. I know that against very low-level opposition, he will score some interesting goals. We saw his header against DC United last week. We saw his brace against Real Esteli in the opening game of CONCACAF Champions League. But when he faces a team of actual quality, like the crew did in Liga MX, he's completely anonymous. He just doesn't have what it takes to play at this level. He doesn't have the technique, the skill, or the awareness. He will get you some tap-in goals against lower-end CONCACAF teams. But guys, in Nations League, we're not playing lower-end CONCACAF teams. We're playing a tough opponent in Honduras and an excellent opponent in Mexico. For me, I don't want Gyasi there. Paul Arriola, guys, he hasn't really played a game since last November. That's 6 months. What's he doing on this roster over a guy like a Caden Clark, or a Paxton Pomykal, or an Eric Williamson, or a Chris Mueller? What's he doing here? I just don't get it. Yes, I know that he's a hard worker and he's a team player and he can finish when given time and space. He's not particularly effective 1v1. When you compress time and space, he often struggles, as we saw in the Gold Cup final against Mexico. I just don't think he has anything to offer, and especially not so that he hasn't played a game in so long. Jordan Siebatcheu had an interesting debut against Northern Ireland. I thought he was good in some ways, but I just think I'd rather have a guy like Daryl Dike, who has similar qualities to Jordan Siebatcheu. I don't think that Dike is as technically good as Siebatcheu, but I think he's more physically dominant, and I think that that offers us something different than a guy like Sargent or Weah. Tyler Boyd shouldn't be involved with the national team, guys. Honestly, I feel bad for him. He probably should have stuck with New Zealand. He's not going to break into our winger depth. He just doesn't have it. Can't really go 1v1. Is now playing in the lower end of the Turkish First Division, not being particularly effective. I know he was left out because of some roster rules, but also he didn't make the roster because he wasn't good enough. Like, there's 2 ways you can look at it. You can say, oh, it's not fair that Tyler Boyd was left out because of the foreigner rule. Also, you can say he wasn't one of their better foreigners. And this is the Turkish league, guys. We're not talking about the Bundesliga. We're not talking about the Premier League or La Liga or even the French league. You should be able to break into the Turkish league if you're a decent winger, and I just don't think Tyler Boyd is. So I hope that these are the 6 forwards that Gregg Berhalter goes with, but like I said, when he drops that 23-man roster, it will be very, very telling as far as who he includes and who he thinks can be effective in this semifinal and final. All right, guys, that's it for now. Tell me what you think of this 40-man roster in the comments. Tell me who you think is going to end up being in the final 23. Check out some of our other videos up there. You guys have an awesome week, and I will see you for a live hangout on Sunday.